All right, everyone. My name is Buck. I'm a 27-year-old real estate developer and recently finished a 2-year build of a software product called DealPage. And I sat down to make a video about how I built that product without knowing how to code, because I didn't. And I was going to talk about all the steps and the tools I used and the processes I went through to get that done. But when I started recording that video, I realized I kept going back and referencing specific points in the years prior that explained why I was making each of the decisions I made. And I realized the video that needed to be made here was not how I built DealPage, just the nitty-gritty technical details. It was the how and why I even got to the starting line of building DealPage and what was driving me to then see this through. Because this is really not a 2-year build of DealPage, it's a 5-year journey since I read a book that changed my life and set a goal and a vision and a plan that guided me along the way and really made the decisions and the cuts and the moves and the pivots for me. And telling this story as I will, you'll be able to see how each one of the decisions I made ties in directly with the next, and how working back, you can see how all the dots connected. And I asked myself then, okay, why am I making that video? Why does that need to be made? Why is it helpful or valuable? And I think the reason is, or what people could get out of it is, if you are trying to build the life that you want, you have an idea for what you want your life to look like, and you have that goalpost and you just don't know how to get there, and you don't know how to process the process of getting there, this video, I think, is at least a vehicle through which to explore how you are processing and approaching that vision, that dream. So I'll get into it and I'll tell the story of the past 5 years. So I thought about how to explain this book, and truly the easiest way to represent the impact that it had is that my adult life started when I read this book, and that's not an overstatement. And the book is great, the 4-Hour Workweek, and I'll get to what that book is about, but a few things were going on in my life that made it particularly impactful. At that time, when I read it, I was at home getting hip surgery. I had left college during my senior year, and I was home for 2 or 3 months getting a hip surgery. And I was literally trapped and not able to do very much at all, both in the lead up to the surgery and afterwards. The second thing that happened or was going on at that time was just a few months prior, I had left the country for the first time. Travel had always been a love of mine, but I had only ever been able to do it in the States. I had biked across the country on a few trips and traveled as much as I could other than that in the Midwest where I grew up. Leaving the country and going to Vietnam blew my world open and really set me up for what I was about to read, because the 4-Hour Workweek at a micro level is a book about online business and e-commerce, and using e-commerce as a vehicle or a means to get time and location freedom to travel and minimizing labor to income ratio. But at a macro level, what I think the book is about is just lifestyle design. That's a term he uses in the book, that this idea of generating the vision of what you want your life, your day-to-day life to look like, and then making the plan and executing on it to get there. And when I read this book, there's a couple goal setting exercises in the book that I did. I did some others that I had learned. And generally I used this couple month period when I read this as a big planning period for my life. At that time in my senior year of college, I had already received a job offer for coming out of school. I was going to start working in finance in New York a few months after graduation, but I really knew, especially once I went to Vietnam, I didn't want to do that, and I knew it wouldn't last long. I didn't exactly know what I wanted to do, but this book helped me think through a few things, and when I set my goal, I had about 5 goals in order, and the first ones were pretty short-term and small. It was to save up enough money to travel in a truck camper that I planned to build for the summer before going to New York. You'll see why that's important. To start a profitable e-commerce business so that I could go travel. I really wanted to do a vagabonding trip. There's this other great book called Vagabonding that inspired me that I read right around this time. And I wanted to go do a long trip and see the world. And lower down on my list was building a hotel brand. And the reason that was there was I had already spent about a year or year and a half working in real estate development while I was in school. So I knew that world, I knew finance and was getting into it, but I knew I didn't want to go just do banking and private equity and whatever else. I knew too that I loved design. I started in architecture when I started college. I just generally loved design and creativity. And most importantly, I loved travel. And looking back, you look at those three things, it's a perfect fit with hotel development. And I'm glad in my role in the real estate development company that I was working for, up until I went home for the surgery, we were starting to get into Airbnbs and hotels and hospitality. And I'm grateful I had that experience, because I think I wouldn't have seen how those three things could come together without that. But those were the goals I set, and I went back to school for that semester and I got started right away. I was working still for this real estate development company, a small partnership, a great experience for me. I was hustling. I was trying to find ways within that job to make commission. I was selling parking spaces. I was doing my normal job, which was like admin, project management. I was doing handyman work, landscaping, building fences, anything I could do to generate money to save up for that first goal. And I also at this time had my first online business e-commerce idea. It was a shower soap dispenser for Airbnbs, a problem that I encountered when I was setting up some of the properties that we were bringing online. The world got rocked in March of 2020, and that idea fell to the wayside, and I just focused on getting the semester done, graduating, and getting in my truck and going. At the end of the semester, I built out a camper and I headed west. My plan had actually always been to go east and spend the summer in the Outer Banks before going to New York City. And you'll see going west was a pivotal decision, and I can't even say why I did. Just for some reason, I went west without a real direction. The first place I went to was Denver, just because I knew someone there. And my truck ended up breaking down, and I needed to get it fixed. And I went to Boulder because I knew someone, and they set me up with a friend of theirs for a place to crash while I got my truck fixed. And at this point, I was obsessed with this e-commerce online business idea, and I was talking to everybody about it that I could. I had other ideas in my head, and the person that I crashed with told me about how when he was backpacking Europe, he basically took a pillow that he stuffed with his own stuff to use on the plane. And somehow I latched onto this idea, and that was the next thing I started to work on. And as I traveled for the rest of the summer, I was pushing that idea forward. My whole mind was consumed by this. I made that first goal happen. I wanted to make the second one happen. So I pushed that forward, but towards the end of the summer, a few key things started to come together. Number one, I realized I did not want to go to New York City. Now, New York was definitely a dream of mine and still is, and I plan to move there soon. But the bigger dream was travel, and I didn't think moving to New York was the right way to do it. I wanted to stay light, keep costs low, and get out into the world and travel as soon as possible. So what I did is I went and I bought a more legit truck bed camper, made up some story to my job, how I didn't feel safe going back to the city yet, going into the office. Everything was still going on at that point, and I was able to stay out west. I went back to Boulder and rented a driveway from a plumber and lived as light and as efficient as possible. The other key thing that happened is at the end of the summer, as I was preparing to do all that, one of my last stops was in Bozeman, Montana. And while I was there, I saw a piece of land for sale. And now one thing that was recurring throughout that summer, I was actually caravanning with a group of young people. There was a lot of people on the road that summer because a lot of people could work remote for the first time. And I met a lot of people, and we would drive around and work from coffee shops during the day and then go camp out of town at night. But we could never find a place to work because we'd always get kicked out of these coffee shops. We could never find consistent, good places to stay that were all near nature and that had, a feeling like they were for us, not these big RVs and older people. And I had an idea for a van life RV park or van life campground with some amenities, sauna, wellness, all the things that we were into. And I started working on it. I knew enough about real estate development just to get started, a simple financial model, putting together a plan. And this was right before I had to go back to my job. I went and I started that job. I was living in the camper, living in the driveway, and I kept both things going. I kept the pillow and the online dream going. I kept the RV park going, and I started to just meld them all together into this one big thing that had like an e-commerce and a media component. Looking back, I was just kicking the can down the road. I was just getting reps, and I was experimenting and trying things, thought experiments. I did get the pillow out there. I was doing other things like flipping mason jars online out of my camper. And I do think I had some level of awareness then that none of that was going to be my thing, but I was just trying to get the wheels spinning. So this is moving forward, and about the 6-month mark with my job, I had just reached a point where I was done. I was just done. And I had a contract where I had to stay a year. Otherwise I would have to give back my signing bonus, but I was so over it and so ready to just go out on my own. It was less about the job. I just knew I needed to just go for it. I didn't have much of a plan, and I thought I was going to be giving the signing bonus back. So I just had a couple grand to my name, and I quit. I started getting some odd gigs. I started getting some handyman work, which I've done for a long time, getting my wheels going. And the first thing I did after that was to start offering the highest value service that I knew, which was financial modeling and pitch decks, which I didn't really even know that well, but I was able to start selling clients and learning as I went, literally watching YouTube videos each time, and was doing all right with it. The initial plan was to just do that to get to a point where I could start an e-commerce or an online thing, but I was like, maybe this is it. If I could just get a few clients per month, that's more than enough for me to go travel. And that's when I started to make plans. I was looking for apartments. I decided to start in Budapest, and I was going to do this backpacking world tour, doing financial models and pitch decks remotely. But what happened was I started to get opportunities that I just frankly could have never expected. One in particular, one of my earliest clients and biggest clients flew me down to Miami to meet me in person. They wanted to retain me more consistently. And I fly down there, and the first night at dinner, just offhand, they mentioned, yeah, we were just in Denver looking at this glamping concept. And I said, okay, I actually have been working on something like that. Would you guys be interested? And they said, yeah, let's take a look. So I went back to my hotel room that night, and I put together a deck just with the work I had been doing. As soon as I was making enough money handymanning, I had hired a friend of mine to do some renderings. A handyman client of mine asked for some help to do this glamping thing in his backyard. I had the materials for that, and I put this together and pitched them the next day. And while they weren't into the van life idea or the e-commerce and all this other stuff I tried to present, they really liked the glamping. They essentially said, do this on the side, keep working with us. I was helping them raise money in venture capital, which will come back in later on. Do this on the side. If you can get it where it needs to go, where we can fund it, we'll help you fundraise for it. And at the time, I had this plan to just do financial models and go travel, but I figured, what the hell, I might as well do it, and honestly thought I would just learn from it. And so on the side, I started researching all around the country, trying to find land, looking into zoning code and regulation and build costs, and I was learning a ton. And as it was going forward, we made a connection with a family office in Arizona. I was having trouble narrowing down the entire Western US. We decided to meet with this family and explain the idea at a high level. They really liked it. We flew down there to meet them, and I pitched this family, and they said if I could find a piece of land, they'd help fund it. And not only that, they liked the concept so much, which by that point had transitioned from glamping to more solid structures. I had done enough research to realize glamping was not the path for me. They wanted me to do it on another piece of property that they owned as just the project lead and hire me to do that. So all of a sudden there's two opportunities, which I never could have expected. But I still have in my mind, I literally had an apartment booked on Airbnb for 2 weeks starting in the middle of August, and that was going to be the start of my trip. But something happened. The investor group that was going to back me on this, they started to bring in people that had more experience. I sort of dropped down the totem pole, and I was actually okay with this because I thought somehow I could do this remotely. If they were going to be taking the lead on development, I could be involved and learn and get to my end goal and get some experience, but just be doing financial models and planning and things like that remotely for the group. After that Arizona trip, when we all went back to our separate cities, I was back in Boulder, the deal just started to lose momentum. The deal was losing momentum because you need someone on the ground pushing it forward, and we didn't have anyone in Arizona. And I remember we had this call on July 14th, just a few weeks before I was supposed to head out, and everyone else that was involved was basically saying they were going to go pursue the other opportunities that they had ongoing. Reasonably so. I heard this and I just thought that there was an opportunity then for me to move back up the totem pole if I was willing to take a big leap, which was moving down to Arizona. And no one asked me to do this. I just put my hand up and I was like, hey, I will move down there if you guys help pay for Airbnbs, and I'll basically go move around and search for land. And that was the deal we did. And I packed up my van and got down there. But I don't want to underplay, like, there was a huge amount of internal debate with this, both in the few days following that call, as I was really thinking about, do I really want to do this? They gave me like a week to think it over. And then after I moved to Arizona for a few months, I was really debating, like, am I doing what I was always afraid to do, which was to put money and career ahead of what has always been my core passion and desire, which is to travel and see the world with my very short time on this planet. But something about it, it just felt like an opportunity I couldn't pass up. Again, it was the opportunity to like grab hold of the leadership of this project, which was in this unique situation where it was in Arizona and no one was there. I just didn't think the stars would align again to have that opportunity. So I went for it. And I always figured that I could go back to the original plan if I needed to. But I also didn't want to let the online business, the time freedom, the whole idea of higher income to lower labor ratio, I didn't want to let that go. I believed in it for myself and my own lifestyle, but also by this point, when I moved back down there, I had a legitimate project moving forward. I was the project lead on that other development the family owned. And I had the original concept that I was pushing forward. I was developing hotels, my end goal, right? I was becoming a real estate developer. And one thing I knew about real estate development and growing a real estate development business from having worked for one, that small partnership that I mentioned in college, there's a huge challenge in development to grow and scale these businesses, the development business, because the way you get paid is at these milestone fees or these big windfall exit and refinance events. And there's big time gaps between both active projects. You know, you may go years without having a project, and then even within a project, there's still really big gaps of time. And now for a single person, that may be okay, especially in the beginning. You may get a fee payment that's big enough to last you 6 to 8 months until the next one. But any desire to build a team, it's very difficult. So what a lot of people do is start operating businesses to be the operational base of their development efforts. And I had seen this done firsthand, the common businesses being brokerage, property management, project management. But I looked at those and I had all these ideas in my head from 4-Hour Workweek, and I had this theory, this new way of approaching life and work this online world had created, which was not around earlier in these earlier models of development, didn't have that available to them. And I thought about what if that time freedom, income to labor, you have this extra time, the guys in the 4-Hour Workweek go off and travel. What if you put that into development? And I didn't know fully then, but I was starting to see the real challenge with development is not as much the money needed to do the actual deal, because if it's a good deal and it's well prepared, even if you have money, you are typically raising money to do the actual deal. It's the time and true money, financial costs needed to get a deal there, to get it started. And I was already seeing this on this Arizona deal. We had to fly out there. We had to hire engineers and architects and all these things. And I thought, if I want to be a hotel developer, if I want that to be, my passion, my craft, which I was starting to fall in love with it. And I could already tell that my earlier thesis, believing that that might be it for me, it felt right. If I wanted to do that long term, I needed to have some way to stabilize my base that didn't require me to start these businesses that had a lot of personnel, that were geo-dependent, that had low margins. I wanted to do something different. I thought I could have a serious, unique advantage if I could figure out this online world in development. There wasn't any developer doing that. And what could I do if I had that extra time? And looking back, maybe I was just rationalizing doing too much and doing too many things, because essentially what I did was I started an e-commerce business with a friend of mine from home, mainly Amazon FBA, selling Apple AirTag accessories. And I was doing both at the same time. I moved to Arizona. I was pushing the Sedona deal forward, looking for land. I was doing this other project, managing that project, and starting this Amazon business. And I knew people in my life firsthand that had Amazon businesses that were highly automated, that they didn't have to touch that often, and that were producing cash flow. And what I realized very quickly, within like 4 to 6 months, and the business worked. We got it, I think, like $60,000 the first year in just the end months of that first year. And the second full year, $250,000 in revenue. But it was extremely difficult, not just because I was doing so much. What really started to kill me was this idea of context switching. So going back and forth across two totally separate worlds and topics and areas and industries, this process of going from working on a financial model to designing a Facebook ad to talking to a civil engineer about a site plan to looking at a schematic of a dog collar, it was just tearing my brain apart. And I realized I thought I was so smart with this like online business, real estate. The other developers are not going to know what hit them. I ended up getting hit. I was just taken out by this. I was exhausted. And I knew I needed to find some sort of online business model that was still in the real estate domain. That was why I realized real estate development companies traditionally pursued this set of businesses: the brokerage, the project management, the property management. And not only because of the context switching, but also because of the residual benefits that these businesses create on the other side in development. Your brokerage, property management, project management clients, they're your partners. You're brokering your own deals. There's these synergies. And thirdly, lastly, I had people in my life, mentors, really call out to me like, hey, this story just doesn't make sense. Like, you're e-commerce, but you're hotels. And I didn't give it much credence then, but I can definitely attest to it now. Story makes a big difference. Internally for the problems I just talked about, but also externally in how people perceive you. And that's important in business. People need to understand what you do and what you offer and what you specialize in. And frankly, being too spread apart, the old saying goes, if you're good at everything, you're not great at anything. So I spent some time thinking about what my thing was going to be. How can I bring this back in within the real estate domain? So right around this time, this is spring of 22, something that I had been doing in my own business for a while was scraping Airbnb data off the internet. I would pull ADR, occupancy, and revenue numbers and use that for my own underwriting. And I was looking at a lot of deals too at this time. So I was doing this a lot, and people would see this and ask me for this data. And I would sell these spreadsheets for a few $100s each just to people I knew in my network. And once I had this realization about the e-commerce business, I thought that that might be a better option. It was something I thought I could sell online. It was something within my direct domain of hospitality, real estate. I could talk the talk. I knew people who needed it. It just all made sense. So I started iterating and pushing that idea forward. I tried different ways of packaging the data, but I kept just hitting a wall. People were not that interested in it. And looking back now, that would have been an awful business because AirDNA has since, the main competitor in this space, has since implemented the ability to just download the data, which you couldn't then. So I was a little bit lost, but right around this time, I came across someone who changed my life. Online, I've never met him, but a guy by the name of Peter Levels. I must have found him on a podcast or a YouTube video, I think. And I had heard of him because I knew of one of his websites, but Peter Levels is a guy who's a self-taught programmer. I believe he's Dutch. He's built 4, 5, 6, maybe more successful online businesses, websites, niche products that generate at that time during the pandemic $300,000 to $400,000 a month in revenue, extremely high profit margin and extremely automated to the point where he only had one part-time contractor and he was just traveling the world and had been doing so for years. And I was hooked. I was inspired like I'd never been inspired before. I watched and read and listened to everything that he had out there. And this world that he was in and sort of like the leader of, this indie hacker, indiepreneur world, is a whole group of people doing just that, finding very small, specific niche problems and solving them with technology and generating not massive revenues, sometimes they do, but enough where for a single person or a couple people, very substantial. And again, I saw in this the high income to labor ratio and the ability to put that time and money and effort back into real estate development. I got very excited about this. I also was really attracted to this space, the indiepreneur, indie hacker space. It all was about autonomy. Like some of the biggest maxims are, don't raise money, don't raise venture capital. Investors have a hold on you. Don't worry about, teaching yourself to code and just doing that in a dark room. Just one step at a time, solve each problem at a time, and do so with the tools and knowledge that you have at your disposal or the ones that you can learn easiest. And so that's what I did with AirCalc. I had been doing everything in Google Sheets. I started learning slowly how to optimize the pulling and scraping of data. I was adding in little snippets of code to the back end of Google Sheets. And I was thinking about a product in a new, very specific niche that I could go after. And the first idea I had was for real estate agents who are trying to sell homes, mainly positioned as Airbnbs, investment properties. I had met a couple agents doing that in Scottsdale. It's such a hot market for it. I was living there at the time. And I spent a couple of months putting together a prototype of this webpage that I would give to the real estate agent, or that they would create and generate somehow. I didn't quite figure that part out yet. But the webpage would have the data of surrounding Airbnbs to that home being sold, the home's information, a map with comps in the area that you can click into, just everything you would need to hand to a potential buyer, a potential investor. And I brought this to this agent that I knew, and I asked him how much he would pay for it. And I thought it would be a decent amount just because I was selling the spreadsheets for $400. I remember he said $49 max one time, and it just burst my bubble. And it wasn't just that. I was wary about the product already just because I wasn't excited about it. I was in real estate, but not residential brokerage. And I didn't know that world, and I couldn't speak to those people. And I already had a sense for that. And luckily, my entry into this world of technology, coming through Peter Levels and Indiepreneurs and this whole approach, I think I was just particularly attuned and aware of the need for that level of like domain expertise in order to be successful. So I backed off that idea pretty quickly. And it's not to say I wasn't still very, very intensely obsessed and motivated about dreaming this goal. I just needed to take a step back. And luckily by that time, there was a third hotel that had spun up. This entire time, I'm still doing these real estate deals. My moonlighting nights and weekends is this whole world of internet money. And in the real estate side of things, this third hotel started up in New Orleans down here where I am, where basically my old employer actually and the investors who were backing me on Sedona came together, and I came in and got a small seat at that table to develop a hotel. And my initial role was not that big, but over time it grew. I sort of came up with the initial creative concept and direction. I kept speaking up, kept getting more and more involved. And that summer I got tasked with putting together the pitch deck. And I decided I was just going to pour everything I had into this deck just because I had so much pent up energy. And so I did. I was obsessive. I gathered all the best decks I could. I took them in from people I knew, friends. I had them send them all to me. I printed them out and I truly peeled them back, dissected them out, laid them out on my apartment floor. I spent like 6 to 8 weeks making this deck. And I've told this story before on social. Truly, I got to the end of this deck and it was great. I got tons of feedback from my partners. We put it out there. Eventually, we raised the money, got good feedback from investors. But I looked at this thing. I was like, all that work for this? Like, it's still just a PDF. And I think I was particularly attuned to this. I was looking for problems to solve. And I was more aware of what was possible with technology for much, much lower development costs than there had ever been before. And I just knew there was a way I could make this better. In particular, because I had just done that whole AirCalc page idea. And I had taught myself a little bit of Webflow, this web page builder that's sort of halfway between a drag and drop and doing custom code. I had begun to learn and to see what was possible. And I thought I could do this. I could make this better. And it was truly an idea. I had this idea in the shower. And it was one of those things, sometimes you hear like the name of a startup, even some of the best names in the world, these names come like way later and it's after a ton of debate and they just get started and focused on the product and it's okay if the name sucks in the beginning. DealPage came to me right away because I was just like, oh, it's a deal page. And I looked in the domain, dealpage.io was available, not .com, but Peter Levels' Twitter handle is levels.io because .io is the software.com. And I dove in. And so what I did first is I just sketched this initial concept and I had in my head like a page builder. If you've built a web page, you've probably tried one of these like drag and drop builders where there's these like blocks. I was like, oh, I'll just make it where the blocks are for pitch decks because, pitch decks typically have these certain sections. Because I had just went so hard on the Hotel Pearl deck, I looked at so many decks, I was starting to see, commonalities. And I knew I could do some sort of templated web page builder in theory. Then I took it out to some people, some friends, developer friends, some contracted developers, just to price it out. And I realized there was no way I was going to be able to build that myself and no way I was going to be able to do that without raising money. But I thought, okay, what would Peter Levels do? Do it with the tools and knowledge that you have at your disposal. And by that time, I knew enough of Webflow to be dangerous. I thought I could build my own just website pitch deck. And I thought I could enhance it with these plugins that I knew about from getting into the indiepreneur space. And I thought, even in the beginning, I was like, okay, I can probably eventually sell this as a service. I had sold pitch decks for years, if you remember that. And I knew I could get thousands of dollars for doing that. I'll just do this and sell the DealPage decks. And probably by the end of a year of doing that, I could have enough money to maybe hire the developer to do the web drag and drop product. So I got started. The first thing I needed to do was actually just learn how to make the first one. And that took like 8 months. It was for the Sedona deal. And I knew we were going to raise in like February. I had the idea in August. I knew I needed to get started then because I had a feeling it would take a long time, and it did. It truly came down to the wire. The week we were going to go out, and we weren't raising money for Sedona yet. We were just shopping it with certain investors. I was still finishing things up. But I spent that fall and through that winter teaching myself, watching YouTube videos, going on Fiverr and hiring people to coach me. I found this platform called Hops.io, which is like Fiverr, but it's literally you do the work together on a Zoom call. I was one of their biggest users for this stretch of time. I'm still on their homepage, and the CEO just emailed me the other day. That's actually a big part of how I learned at least the initial Webflow development and Figma design. I was doing all this myself largely. And I got to the end and I got that first Sedona one out there, and the feedback was incredible. Like I said, the Hotel Pearl deck got good feedback, just in the sense of like, oh, nice deck. You know, to me, a lot of it from my partners. I was getting texts sent back to me that other people had sent some of my partners on the Sedona deal. Like, what is this? This is the best thing I had ever seen. I've never seen something like this. I had like a lead capture form on the root domain of DealPage, and people were filling it out, and some of these people were like big developers that had somehow gotten the Sedona deck passed to them. That was a big deal for me. It really validated that there was something there. I had never felt that before with the shower dispenser thing, the camping pillow, tag lock, AirCalc. I had always experienced resistance, and this just felt like butter. People liked it. It was visual and they wanted it, and people knew PowerPoints and PDFs sucked. So this was February of 2023. March of 23, I got my first client. It was a startup, and I just started doing decks for people. I knew, again, from Peter Levels, I wanted to focus on real estate, but I knew I also needed to get just whatever revenue I could coming in the door. So I start doing decks, and each one I am like rehashing and rehashing. I'm not recycling. I thought I could get to a point where I was using templates for people, but I was never satisfied with the product. And each one I did, not only would I like recreate it and reteach myself and try to level up myself, I wanted the deck output themselves to be so good that that visual would sell the next client. The next client, I was literally like rebranding and branding people's projects for free, reconcepting, like getting renderings done for free just to make them better. And I remember this one deck, probably the third or fourth that I did, I told this guy it would take like 4 weeks. It took 8 or 9. And I just, because I poured myself into this thing and rebranded, reconcepted, redid his whole thing. And I delivered it to him on Friday at like 2 p.m. I remember I sent the email, and I got a call back from him like 2 minutes later. And I answered the phone, and there's no word of a lie. He goes, "What the fuck is this?" And I thought he was upset. I hadn't really been showing it to him along the way. And he just starts saying like, "This is like nothing I've ever seen. This is incredible. This is the future. Like, why isn't everyone doing this?" And he hands the phone to his buddy. He's like, "Look, listen to Jim. Like, this is what he thinks." And this guy's like, "Man, I don't know you, but this is awesome. Like, you've done such a good job. Like, this is going to work." And I remember like, I just broke down, and that I got off the phone. I was dog sitting for a friend and just like collapsed on the floor. This dog was like coming up to me, trying to comfort me, just because I was like putting so much into this, and I kept getting these signals. And I think that was very important for me to keep going. I was probably at a year of DealPage by this point. I was at, 3-4 years of just trying to figure out how to make money that wasn't directly tied to my labor. And this big effort had just exhausted me so much, but I was finally starting to find some traction. So coming out of that deck, I did 2 really critical things that summer of 2023 that changed a lot and are still impacting me to this day. Number 1 is I knew the reason why I was rehashing each deck and kind of rebuilding, I knew something didn't feel right. I knew this wasn't like a product. It was website pitch decks. And I wanted to make DealPage a product. That was very important to me. It had to be its own thing. And more importantly, I realized that I was learning how to design web pages, which are designed to be skimmed and to sell like $30 products like TagLock. They're not designed to sell a $10 million deal when the information that's there, which is usually a lot more information, is critical. It can't be skimmed. And I had been getting feedback that the way I had these websites set up, it's like straight up and down. You could just scroll through the whole thing. So I took a step back. I got a reference from someone to a graduate school designer in San Francisco, but a great UX and UI designer. And I talked him into helping me for what to me was a lot of money, a few $1,000s, certainly not what it was worth. And we dove in on this like 2-month long study of pitch decks and web pages and trying to find the formula. Again, furthering what I had done the summer before, we went nuts. We have this Figma doc with just all different types of decks and narrowing down to like, okay, what are the core slides and sections that people do? What works, what doesn't, what layouts work? Like we can't do too much animation like web pages. People start to lose the point of the deck. Like how can we make the information the key thing here? This was all the work that we were doing. And what came out of that was what's called like a UX UI design system. You can see it now in the decks that came after this period. We have this sort of hybrid of horizontal and vertical scroll. You move through the deck like a deck, but you can also scroll down. It chunks up the information better. We added in like a navigation menu and some other things. So that was a big pivotal moment. You'll see how it does or doesn't come back in later. And I think there's a question of, was that worth it or not? But I'll let you decide when we get there. The other thing that I did that summer definitely has had an impact. Essentially, I had a B2B person come to me, a B2B sales agency. They go into other businesses and sell on their behalf. And they wanted to make a sales deck for their corporate company to sell other companies. Again, I wanted to focus on real estate, but I needed anything I could get. And this was going to be a quick little consulting fee to make this deck. But we get into a conversation and I'm in this founder group called Hampton, which is like EO or YPO for internet people. And that's where I met them. So we kind of knew each other and we were just talking about it probably more candidly than, a stranger client. And they're like, yeah, we're starting to see these products where you can like send out custom pages, but they're so expensive and we think they can be done better. Like, do you think we could make DealPage where like each time you send it, some of this text is switched out? So you could put in the specific prospect company's name and their logo and yada, yada, yada. I didn't know how to do that. I said we could. And I talked to this contracted developer that I was starting to work with consistently, who I'm still working with to this day. And we thought that we could figure it out using essentially the same technology that blogs use. It's CMS. We didn't do much more research than that when I told them that we could. And they talked about partnering, but I knew, again, I wanted to keep DealPage lean and mean, and I wanted to own it. And I wasn't interested in partnering, but I said, let's do this. I'll develop it and the technology. If we can get it there, we'll do a rev share. They had a plan to basically upsell the clients that they were already selling on using this tool. Like, hey, we're going to come in and do sales with you or for you. This tool helps. So that was really intriguing. But I said, if I develop it, they didn't want to pay unless there was a partnership. I own the technology. And that's what we agreed to and we got started. And a lot of people in my life told me not to do it. They reminded me of Peter Levels and of tag lock in the context switching and doing too much in two different worlds and getting distracted. But there's a couple reasons why I did it. Number one, probably really one primary reason, if I'm being honest, by this point, we had done that UX UI system. I think we were right in the middle of it. And I was just realizing on each deck that I did for clients, it was going to be very hard to build a product where people could build those decks. They were highly custom. Every deal is so different. Even within real estate, I thought they'd be more similar. They're not. At least the approach that I was taking, the mindset I was in, I didn't see how I could make a simple enough product to produce what I was producing without raising money. And I didn't want to do that. And I also was worried about creating a subscription product or a high enough ticket product in DealPage with where I was at that point. And what I saw with B2B was, yes, it was a different world, but there was definitely a high ticket and subscription component to it. There was companies that were charging thousands and thousands of dollars a year because it was pay per seat in these big B2B organizations. Basically, it was just enticing to me. And I had this potential partner or revenue share partner that knew that world. They could step in that way, in the domain expertise sense. So I got started on it. And I also knew that it was just going to make me better with technology and development. It was going to make my developer, Lasan, better, which I was very interested in. I was enjoying learning. And we started to develop this product where you fill out a form and it generates a new page every time. And we were adding on features to that, such as like a view tracker form on the back end, an intake form where people put in their information. And I was basically cross-implementing these features over to DealPage, which was great and a benefit that I thought I would get from it. So we would add the intake form feature, and we just kept improving both products. I kept doing client decks, and I was continuing to push forward my development deals. But after a few months of this, I was burnt out again. The same thing with TagLock, the context switching, and just doing too much in general. I remember I took this trip, I went up to Memphis, and I never left town at that point. I was just working all the time, but taking that trip was crucial. It allowed me to kind of step back for a second, and on the 5-hour drive up from New Orleans, I called a few key people in my life that I talked to about business, my dad, some certain friends, and I told them all the situation. We talked it out, and most people were saying, like, go the B2B route. And I failed to mention, at this time, going into that weekend, we had for the next week scheduled an onboarding call with what was going to be the first revenue share client for $32,000 a year. And again, that sounds crazy, but the comp companies in this space were charging like $100 per seat and a setup fee and a minimum. And that was what these were selling for. And I was super excited. I was going to get most of that revenue, but I was super scared because I knew that would lock me in to B2B. If I wanted to switch after that and I had someone who paid 32 grand, or if there was bugs and things I needed to fix and my heart wasn't in it, I just felt awful about that. And I didn't think I could do it or that it was right to do. And I spent that time in Memphis and I reflected on it. And on the drive back down, I basically decided to cut the B2B, just cut it. And the next day on Monday, I sent the revenue share partner who's in the UK an email and I said, I can't do this. This isn't for me. I'm sticking with my guns and capital raising, which they knew I was doing. And I just said, if you want the technology, we can talk about you purchasing it, but I'm going to keep going forward. They weren't out any money. They had sort of guided the development of the product along, so they weren't out. I had gained skills and insights and features, which you'll see how they start to come in. So I felt okay, although I put a substantial amount of money and effort into it, but I knew I just had to cut my losses. And I had to stay true to my gut, which was if real estate development and hotel development is going to be my life, in my career, in my craft and passion, if this is what I'm going to do, I want my business, whatever that is, to align with that. I want to be in alignment so I can have those residual benefits, so I can create new relationships with potential partners, so that I can focus all in on one industry. All these things that I had been learning and experiencing over the years with the different attempts. So I made that decision and I just got started on what was then going to be this next phase of DealPage, where I just had to figure out how to make it work, even with the doubts that I was having about there being a real product opportunity there. But what happened was right after I cut the B2B, I had a new level of clarity and focus and time back. And I had been adding and implementing those features, as I mentioned, to the capital raising side along the way. And I just started to build off of that. And I started to build out this back end and adding in features that I knew of from my time working with that venture capital group, all these challenges and things that we faced and solved for with all these different tools stitched together back then, I started to solve them one step at a time within this dashboard. So again, like the advantage of going with your domain expertise, I knew things that no one else knew, especially not true just technical founders that were starting a lot of the other apps in this investment management space. I had friends who were using some of these competitors, these high-priced investor CRM type competitors, which is what we started to drift towards on the back end. And they would tell me that it was too complicated to the point that they were still just using Google Sheets. And my response to that was adding a Google Sheets-like back end where it was no more complicated than just editing a spreadsheet. So I was doing all that, and I had the advantage of having clients and friends and partners, again, directly in my orbit that were giving me feedback, but also giving me opportunities. One of my clients, who's also one of my partners, I did a custom DealPage for them. And I said, hey, let me just like hop into this raise effort with you. I will help you manage this raise. I have this experience doing this, talking to investors, setting up calls, etc. And that will give me the experience to basically user test my own platform. So I helped run this raise with them to the point of like I was on calls in leading calls and then getting back off, and we set up a data room and we were sending that out. We were tracking everything in this spreadsheet and it was great. I learned a lot and I kept developing this product. But what I started to realize with how hard it was to develop this CRM like backend, that again, I was letting the product get a little bit too complicated if I really wanted to optimize for whole ownership, small, lean, efficient income to labor, cash flow going into real estate, I was starting to overbuild. And again, grateful for coming in the way I did with 4-Hour Work Week and through Peter Levels into this entrepreneur space and the guidance that I received, because I wouldn't have been so aware of that. And I kind of took a step back and thought about like, what am I going to do here? And it was really important then too, because I had these 3 hotels going. Subtle reminder again, I've been doing that the whole time. This is just the moonlighting side of things. I had a 4th hotel come on board at this point. Went after this opportunity outside New Orleans where I had moved back to get another deal under my belt because I was excited about the opportunity and partially to generate more revenue to fund the development of this tool. And I was getting so busy that I couldn't keep doing, certainly not these custom client decks that were taking so long, at least not for the money I was able to charge. The money it would take for me to still make sense for me to do that, it was cost prohibitive to most people. And I didn't really want to spend the time to go out and hire like a copywriter and a project manager and whatever else to do these decks, like a lot of people told me to do, because I wasn't optimizing for that either. I didn't want to build an agency. So I was left with a couple choices and I needed to find a way to basically scale back that effort or stop it or find a new route. And a few things started to come together. Number one, I tried to basically sell, rather than scaling it back down, another thing that I've learned from people online is just go up market. And I tried to sell a service that was basically like a managed fundraise, like I just did for that group. And that raise didn't close, but we got very close and it went very well. They were very happy with it. And I was going to basically like get involved with people's raises and get paid a lot more. That would make it make more sense to me. Maybe then I could like lightly staff up around me rather than like really going out and recruiting someone who would be a long-term member of like an agency team. I tried that. Point is, didn't get traction. I pitched quite a number of people on it. People just weren't interested in that offer. The next thing I tried then was going down market. And what I did was, I can't do these full custom decks using this design system that we spent so much time on. This is what I meant when I said, debatable whether or not that was a good call. These decks were too complicated and they just took so long. Again, or I needed to charge so much money. So I tried selling what I came up with, a simpler product just called a teaser page. And I can't remember where the idea came from. I think it was one of my partners here. They would raise money a lot just with these 2-pagers. And when you have investors that know who you are and trust you, you don't need a whole deck like that. Maybe if it's a super ambitious or creative project you do, but I saw this and I said, okay, let me try this. And I tried selling that to some people who were coming inbound. And that worked. People liked that. It was easier to sell because the price point could be much lower because it was much more streamlined and efficient. I'm keep doing a few of these custom decks. And while I'm doing this, I'm realizing like they don't take that much customization. These simpler decks are a lot more consistent deal to deal. And again, thankfully, the good thing to come out of that like deep period of study of pitch decks the summer before, and even the Hotel Pearl exercise before that, I knew so well what a pitch deck needed to have and what it didn't need to have. I was able to dial that into a pretty refined template that I was just using with every custom client that I was doing, more or less, some level of variation. And when I got there, that's when I realized like, hey, maybe I can't build the page builder product with the little blocks and drag and drop, but maybe it's just like the B2B product, but rather than just a few form fields tying into dynamic content, the whole thing, for the most part, besides certain labels, is dynamic content, meaning a user fills out a form, a web form, which by that point I knew how those worked, and that data goes into a new page that gets generated. And that was the idea I had. And in January of this year, maybe December, I sat down with my developer, Lasan, who is now full-time with me, and another contracted developer. And I said, how long is this gonna take? And they said 3 weeks. So I go, all right, let's do it. And I'm in there with them, like probably doing 30 to 40% of the Webflow development, almost 100% of the Figma design. I'm doing all this while I'm doing these hotel projects, while I'm also at this point had found some success, some real success on social media and creating more content for that because I knew it would be important once I wanted to launch DealPage. I'm like burning it at all ends and I had to drop something. And what I decided to drop was the custom DealPage work. It pulled me too much away and it was a big risk because that's generating revenue. Developing the product is not. But I thought we were so close. Even when we got to the end of that first 3-week sprint and we weren't there, I truly believed at each point it was, oh, we're just a week away, I'm good. It took like 8 weeks in the end. And I kept getting to these end of the weeks. I'm like, I need to fire my developer. Like, I'm running out of money. And I kept just being like, no, one more, and pushing it and pushing it. And certainly in the beginning of that, it truly was like technical challenges holding me back. I would say towards the end, I probably could have gotten it out there sooner. But what started to happen, and this is something I've dealt with forever and I still deal with, I'm not obviously afraid of taking big risks, like going after these projects and things like that, because you never come face to face with failure. I am, however, I do get affected by smaller instances of failure. Like, hey, here's this page creator, pay me $200, no. And then everybody says no. Like, that is very scary to me. I've thought about this a lot, but I think what was hitting me was this fear that I would put it out there, it would flop, like AirCalc flopped, and I would have to face the realization that the thing that I was working on for 2 years, almost at that point, was not the ticket that I thought it was. Even though I had all this validation at every point, you know, when I was getting decks out there, when people saw them, they liked them. I also was starting to allow myself to think too much about like what was going to come next and how was I going to fit into the world of like investor management, pitch deck, softwares, and what was coming around the corner. Eventually, though, I was able to get it out there. And again, the benefit of building in your niche, in your domain, I had all these friends, and even more than I had previously, developers that could test it. And I got it out to a ton of people, and I got a ton of user testing done. And there was almost no feedback. There was one issue with how we were doing the custom map feature, but we fixed that. It was like a $250 fix. And again, not to beat a dead horse here, but like the reason that was the case is only because I am the direct customer of this product. So had I chosen B2B, had I chosen even AirCalc, the real estate agent thing back in the day, like that is why I shouldn't have done those things and I didn't, because I developed this product in a vacuum. And a lot of times you do that and you come out of it and it just doesn't hit, because you can be so gentle with your own product. People who use software, they're only trying to get to the end and they're not thinking about being careful. So to develop something right off the bat that just like works for these people, it only could have happened because I'm so deeply entrenched in this space. I mean, I literally just a couple weeks ago made a deal page for my own deal that I'm using right now to raise money. So I think that's a point of emphasis. And when that feedback went well, I felt better about getting it out there. And I still kept delaying it for a couple of weeks, but finally, a week or so ago, I pushed it live and pushed it out there. And I've been getting sales, and I got to tell you, the first sale I got, I set up this Zapier automation that every time we get a sale, we get a Slack. And the first Slack I got, actually, the first sale I got actually came before we like officially put it out there. Someone just found their way to us and made a purchase. And one of the biggest drags that I faced earlier was not so much creating the custom decks. That did take a lot of time. I didn't mention that it took like 8 or 10 sales calls just to sell one, and the follow-ups to those sales calls. And to see a sale come through without having to sell someone in this period of time where I had just run out of time to sell people, and I had to hustle to make something that would sell without me doing it. That's like the simple premise of software, but it really blew me away in the moment when it happened for the first time. But what blew me away even more was like an hour and a half later, I also set up a Zapier automation where we get a Slack with the link to the deal page that gets generated. And I looked at this first deal page and I knew this product, there was a bit of an art and a science to it. Again, this idea of like, I can be careful with it, it's my baby. Like you kind of have to massage it a little bit, the length of your content, the images you use, where you put things, paragraphs versus headers versus bullet points, etc. I knew most people probably wouldn't be able to like get it to be as good as I could on their first go, but I opened this guy's deal page and it's pretty good. I ended up like helping him improve it, but it was good. And I even looked, he attached his old pitch deck PDF that he must have made and wanted to replace. It was awful. And I saw in that moment, like, okay, that's the value here, and it works without me doing anything, and I didn't have to sell this person. And that was a huge, huge moment for me. But, you know, this video, like we talked about, the point of this is talking about the bigger picture of setting a goal and a vision, and how if you do that and just put your head down and work, like I think you can see now, it's not like at each decision I had this where I'm at now in my head and I like charted course to get there. Like I thought B2B was gonna be it. I thought after B2B there was no software product there, but it was like each thing all the way back to the beginning and back to the beginning of reading this book. And I think that should be helpful to people to hear. And I have gotten much better about this, and I'm pretty conscious of it now. I feel very comfortable with just like starting things and trusting that even if they don't seem that great right now, nothing seems that great in the beginning, and it's gonna take time and iterations. And as long as you work at it and you keep working and you work hard, like I don't want to underplay, like I've said, all this that I mentioned, that was the moonlighting. The full-time job was the real estate deals, which are all still going forward. It took a lot of work. And I just say that to say, like, be prepared for that. But anyone, I truly believe anyone can do it. I still don't understand tech that well. I had no idea. I don't know if I mentioned this in the beginning of the video, but I studied creative writing and I had a flip phone as recently as 2018. Like truly, never considered myself a technical person. And I at least now know how things work and I can do some level of the development. But anyways, the next steps, the plan still stays in place. The plan is to have something that creates revenue and income that allows me to develop hotels freed from the burden and control of bringing on investors too early. That's the best way to sum it up. And I've already seen this bear fruit. Like there's been times when I was getting, enough DealPage clients, and there was times where I wasn't getting paid fees. I hit these, breaks between fees throughout this process. And the only thing that's kept me going has been DealPage and some credit cards. But had it not been for all the DealPage development work, DealPage would have kept me going. And I have ideas and dreams now in the hotel space, for after my current projects. I want to develop a hotel on the Oregon coast. I know from my time in Arizona, just searching for land, that's weeks, months, even longer. So you got to go out there. You have to fly out there. You have to rent a car. You have to hire an architect to do a survey if you do find a property. Like those are all the things that I have in my head and I'm preparing for. And then also truthfully, the other thing I'm excited about is the lifestyle from it too. Like hotels, you make good money, but it doesn't come in that often. And I don't feel comfortable like using that as my living income. That's like my investing almost. And I think this will be my income, the income that's going to allow me to move to New York City this year, the income that's going to allow me to start traveling more. I've been able to take some trips over the past few years, but not as many as I'd like. So that's all the plan and the vision and the dream with DealPage, the same roots of the initial dream. But I appreciate anyone who's watched this far. And if you are trying to do something like this, or if you're trying to change your life or create the life you want, I hope this helps. If you are trying to develop real estate and you need to raise money, go to dealpage.io, check it out. Hit me up. Team at dealpage.io is probably best, and we can chat about it if you have questions. But appreciate you guys watching this long. Subscribe to the channel if you want to hear more.